Live pictures inside the courtroom in Centennial, Colorado. James Holmes, a verdict has been reached in his murder case, that from the movie theater shooting from a few years back. 12 people dead in that shooting. We're awaiting the verdict, whether he's going to be found guilty, or not guilty by reason of insanity. We will bring you back to Colorado as soon as we hear anything from the jury. In other news, President Obama today became the first sitting president to visit a federal prison. He went to El Reno in Oklahoma to meet with inmates and officials and highlight his prison reform plan. And it's an ambitious one. The president is calling for reducing or totally eliminating sentences for nonviolent drug crimes. I'm sorry, we're going to take you back to the courtroom in Centennial, Colorado, where we are getting a verdict in the James Holmes case. Let's listen in.
Part C. Did the defendant use or possess and threaten the use of a deadly weapon? Answer, yes. Verdict form, count 2. Murder in the first degree after deliberation, Alexander Boyk. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Egan Holmes, guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. Part B is left unmarked. And Part C reads, did the defendant use or possess and threaten the use of a deadly weapon? Answer, yes. Verdict form, count 3, murder in the first degree after deliberation, Jesse Childress. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Egan Holmes, guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. Part B is left unanswered, and Part C is marked yes in response to the question that I mentioned a couple of times already. Verdict form, count 4, murder in the first degree after deliberation, Gordon Cowden. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Egan Holmes, guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. Part B is left unanswered, and Part C is marked yes. Verdict form, count 5, murder in the first degree after deliberation. We, the jury.
All right, so already we have there multiple counts, multiple guilty verdicts in multiple counts against James Holmes for first-degree murder. We'll get you a total tabulation on that as soon as the judge is finished reading the entire thing. But James Holmes certainly appears on his way to prison for a long, long time, if not the rest of his life. And speaking of prison, we were mentioning before about President Obama's prison reform plan. We'll go back through the details in a second, but I want to introduce Sean Pica. He is the executive director of Hudson Link for Higher Education. He's also a member of the Governor's Council on Community Reentry and Reintegration. And since he's a former prison inmate, he can give us an inside perspective on how the system can be reformed. Sean, thanks for being with us.
Andrew, thank you so much for having me.
So, first of all, the issue in general, a lot of people really don't listen well when it comes to prison reform issues. There's a sense of, well, you know, you sort of made your own bed in all of this and committed the crime, and people's interest often seems to stop at that point.
I know for New York, the 5 most impoverished communities are what fills the New York State prison system. There's 54,000 men and women in New York alone, 60 prisons. So when you start to look across the country, the numbers stack up really quick.
And as we go back through the list of President Obama's reforms that he's proposing, eliminating or reducing sentences for nonviolent drug crimes, improving prison conditions, and providing more job training for inmates. Let me start with the improving prison conditions. What kind of difference does that make for inmates in prison, but also when they get out?
I think, for me, I lived in 9 different maximum security prisons over 16 years. Some of those prisons were much nicer than others. Some of them are so old, they're literally deteriorating under you. There's not a lot we can do about it. We're not going to rebuild those prisons.
I have no doubt that it makes doing the time that much more difficult. But does that make the prison environment that much less safe? Does it change people being in that kind of environment?
It absolutely does. I mean, if the doors don't work, there's so many parts of that prison that are moving parts that if that doesn't operate correctly, it makes the prison officers' jobs hell.
And it makes, I assume, inmates feel less safe.
Absolutely.
And that has representations also. It's not just an in-the-moment kind of thing. If you're spending 15 years living in an environment where you don't feel safe at any point.
This is not just about an inmate feeling safe too. I mean, we're talking about a community within a community. Sing Sing alone has 1,800 men in it, but it's also the staff that work there, the officers that practically live there, the hours they put in, and then the inmates that do live there. If you don't find a mixture that keeps everybody safe, it doesn't work.
Another reform that the president is calling for, reducing or eliminating sentences for nonviolent drug crimes. How many nonviolent drug-related inmates I mean, you must have spent time with hundreds of them, if not more.
There's a misconception that these prisons are filled with murderers and rapists, but the fact is it's a very low percentage of violent crimes that fill those prisons. Much more of the men and women that are incarcerated in New York are there for low-level drug offenses.
You've seen both during your time in prison, but also in your work with Hudson Link as you've tried to help educate inmates. I'm sure you can see changes in people as they spend more and more time behind bars.
Absolutely.
Let's take a nonviolent drug offender who might be might have been drawn into it by economics or by very short-sighted life view. They come out, the old adage is that you go in a puppy, you come out a gladiator. Is that accurate?
Well, I think one of the things that Hudson Link's trying to do is make Sing Sing a university instead of a gladiator school. The idea that these 16, 17-year-olds are coming in. New York's one of only 2 states that sentences teenagers as adults. So these kids have a chance to get away from the things that led them there, hook up with some of these older guys, and go to college. And when they come home, they have real options.
And that's the focus of Hudson Link, is providing the college educations. That, along with job training for inmates. How difficult is the transition? Is there any way for people who have never spent time behind bars to get a sense of how difficult that transition back to the regular world is?
I think for me, as I'm in the process of interviewing for a job, in New York you have to disclose that you've been in prison. So I could see the interviews going well. The resume looks really great. I have a college degree from prison. It doesn't say prison, it says the college that I got it from, which is Nyack College. But then at that point, I have to say, well, before we get too much further, I do have a felony background. If you'd like to discuss it, I'd be open to talking about it. And then they can't look you in the eye. And they don't tell you you're not going to get the job, but they say, good luck, we'll call you, and the call never comes. How many times are you going to do that before you start to do other things? Because you know that job's not coming.
We started this segment talking about the difference. A lot of people don't tune into this kind of issue or plug into it because they feel like it's an inside issue. It's for criminals who have been convicted and are behind bars. But this really does impact the general community at large. Give me an idea of how.
Well, I think the numbers alone are staggering. 2.4 billion people in this country are incarcerated, and if you look at 1 in every 100 folks have either been through the system or in the system now, that means that someone you know or someone in your family has been through the system or is in the system right now, which means that this is affecting everybody. It's not, well, I don't have to deal with it anymore. So people are addressing it. The president's getting involved. The governor has his task force dealing with reentry. This is becoming an unavoidable topic now.
Does a safer prison system and a better transition back for ex-cons into does that really pay dividends, you think, in terms of safety for the overall community?
For every dollar, and we raise every penny privately for our program. We don't get any state and federal funding, but for every dollar we spend in these prisons, there's a $12 return back in the communities they go back to. Now, we don't get that money back. That's seen in the dividends that they go back as social workers, caseworkers, back in their communities as role models for these younger guys that knew them when they were literally thugs, returning as college-educated men. And these younger guys are following those footsteps because it's a viable option.
And okay, and the proposal, from what you've seen from the president, well, first of all, what did it mean to you to see the president actually going to a federal prison today?
That we're being taken seriously. I mean, up until now, this has been something that's been really swept under the rug. Even though the numbers are staggering, no one's looking at them. This has brought it back to the community, that this is something that we're taking serious as a nation.
From what you've read from the president's reform proposal, do you think that's enough, or do you think it's a good first step, or how far does this go?
I think his visit is a first step. The proposal is the doors that are being opened. The very fact that he's going there as a sitting president, first time ever, addressing these issues is going to unfold in a rapid fashion, I would imagine.
And so give me your best sales pitch for people who are on the fence or who are going to hear this and think, again, this is not an issue for our entire society, but rather for the people who are behind bars. If it's more than that, what's the compelling argument? I
think for me, as a high school dropout that went to prison at 16, had no future, facing a 24-year sentence in prison, when I came home, I had a graduate degree, executive director material, working for the governor's task force now. That's the pitch.
And by the way, Hudson Link for Higher Education, the college degree program for inmates, what's the recidivism rate for people who get the degrees?
Less than 1% of the men and women that have been through the program are returning to prison. www.hudsonlink.org.
And what's the recidivism rate for the general population in prison?
It's about 64% across the country right now.
So you're going from 64% to 1%. That might be a fairly strong argument in favor
I'd like
of
to
some
pitch
of these
that.
reforms. Sean Pica, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
the time
Thank you
and
for
the
having me.
insight. Appreciate it. We want to get you involved on this issue and this conversation. Head to Facebook and Twitter. Sound off on our question. Are too many nonviolent offenders being sent to prison? Now to the other breaking story that we are following for you this evening. The FBI on high alert right now after a gunman killed 4 Marines at 2 military facilities in Chattanooga, Tennessee today. Police killed the gunman at the second facility. A police officer and a military recruiter were injured. Multiple reports have now identified the shooter as 24-year-old Mohammed Youssef Abdulaziz. The Associated Press is reporting that he was born in Kuwait. We are going to continue to update you as new information comes in and as we get new information out of Aurora, Colorado as well. We'll be right back.